Hi, I'm Dr. Pajari, host of the Prognosis, which is a palliative podcast. And today we will be talking about what is hospice, questions pertaining to hospice. My guest today is Evelyn Perrez Rivera, who's back for more questions. So welcome and enjoy. The question for this segment is, what does the onboarding process look like with hospice? So what does coming on service with hospice look like? We'll talk about that.
Sure. So one of the first things that we need to have is an order from a physician. Number one, the terminal diagnosis needs to be there, an order from a physician with a referral to hospice, and having the clinical supporting documents to justify why someone needs hospice at that junction.
Yes, so that's the initial portion of it. Walk me through, as a director of nursing, you do a fantastic job in organizing an actual admission. So let's say I've reviewed clinicals, we've gotten the orders that we needed, the two physician orders, I have clinicals, we have a terminal diagnosis, and we say we're good to go to admit this patient. Walk me through, or walk the viewers through, what does that mean then, admitting a patient to hospice?
So a few things happen. Number one, sometimes during the intake process, we even determine what the patient is going to need from equipment, knowing we have had cases where the patients are really acute, so we need to have medications readily available at the time of admission.
And sorry to interrupt, I'm a big believer personally that the e-kit is an essential component in the house.
Even if we don't use it.
Yeah, we almost always end up needing it. And having that there is really a lifesaver in moments of acuity. So
Yes.
I just wanted to say that.
Yes.
So yes, getting the e-kit.
So having the e-kit there, so hospice takes place wherever the patient is. So what happens is that an admission nurse will come out to the house or to a facility, depending on where the patient resides, and do the admission. And what does that look like? There is the paperwork to be filled out and signed, but most importantly is that assessment on how is the patient's condition at the time of admission.
Yes, and the nurse, I will communicate with the nurse. We make sure that we are getting a very complete assessment clinically, including vitals, including, I like to actually review a short video if we can, and making sure that we are completely assessing the patient, medications, clinicals, vitals, all of it. From a very thorough standpoint.
So after all that happens, that's when the admission nurse called the medical director to give a complete report on her evaluation and her assessment. In that way, at that point is when the medical director says yes or no on whether to proceed forward with that admission.
Yeah, and I will say a lot of times we really have done a good job with a good intake process on hospice. Intake meaning vetting, reviewing, preparing before the admission happens. That's very critical for a good hospice to do that, because with a good intake process, you generally do end up with no issues. You already know that you're going to admit.
Exactly.
And you already anticipate a lot of the needs. One of the other things we forgot to mention for, services provided was wound care. So perhaps you have wounds and you know about this up front. you know what the wound care needs are, and you know what certain medications are needed, or you kind of work on things beforehand. So preparation is key before the actual admission to make it go smoothly.
Absolutely. There's nothing worse than arriving at the patient's residence and having an acute episode or an acute moment when we get there and don't have any medications in hand, don't have the proper equipment to stabilize the condition. That creates so much anxiety for the family, for the nurse, for even for the doctor, because we want to help.
Absolutely, yeah. So onboarding process, any other thoughts besides? I think that covers it. Doing good preparation beforehand.
Absolutely.
Making sure that you get your consents, clinicals, everything in place. Get the two doctors to agree a terminal diagnosis, and then sending out a nurse, and he or she can then from there help the physician, and they can make a decision ultimately and say, okay, we're good to go.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, well, thanks.